example. Again, here, this is just a general topic, but to make that into a research question, you would want to talk about what are available imaging studies for patients in humanitarian settings, or what are the challenges in accessing imaging services for patients who are in humanitarian settings. If we're thinking about this as a research question, things to think about are more of like acceptance or perceptions of healthcare workers regarding artificial intelligence in and how that can be used in radiology, and so. So basically, the first step we would want is to formulate any of the topics into a research question. This is one thing that we would want to do in this workshop. So I've highlighted the 2 steps that we're hoping to achieve during this workshop in yellow. So hopefully we'd be able to pick up one of these topics, formulate a research question for it. The next step would be, once we have a research question, what kind of search strategy do we need to have? And that would allow us to identify as many relevant studies from as many databases. For a scoping review, you could get away with using one database, so something like PubMed. But if you're doing something more extensive, or if you want to have a larger scoping review, you could expand and use a number of different databases. Excuse me. So for the remainder, again, we're not really hoping to cover those in this workshop, but we do plan on setting up subsequent workshops if people are interested and and would want to continue to work on a research topic. And then for the next steps, people, ideally what would happen is the search strategy that we developed, people would use that to search databases, and they would then select specific studies that would fit the research question. I've included Prisma here, and Valerie in his previous workshop goes into a bit of detail about what the Prisma is, but this is basically a standardized way of documented all the number of studies that people have identified using their search strategy, and which studies were included and which studies were excluded. And what's important for excluded study is why we've excluded those studies. Once you have a set of studies that is relevant to your research question and you don't have any reason to exclude them, and reason to exclude them would be is they don't answer a specific part of your question, so they could be on breast cancer but not necessarily on screening, so it could be on management. So that wouldn't necessarily fulfill the criteria, and you would need to document that. And the idea behind that is, you kind of are accountable that your research or your search strategy is comprehensive, but it's also replicable. So someone else can do the same search and get the same findings, and then your results can be corroborated. Once you have a final number of studies, then you would extract the important information. So if the paper talks about how difficult it is to get women to come in for preventive services, then they would document the reasons. For example, there are associated costs with that. So you would need to extract that information. And a tip that I added here is using Google Forms. So to set kind of a Google form that would have all the information that you need to extract, and then instead of using an Excel sheet to extract your information or using a Word document, you could use that form. And this actually is generalizable. You can use it for research, but you could also use it, if you're doing an audit or something, to just make it easier to extract your data. Once you have your information, the next step would be to analyze that. And depending on which research question we end up using, the data analysis could vary. It could be more of maybe a quantitative, this is not very easy to write with, so it could be quantitative analysis, or it could be qualitative analysis, and then that could potentially be a next step where we could look into how the data could be analyzed. And once we have analyzed data, then we could start to explain these findings, discuss these findings, and present those findings or publish those findings. So basically, hopefully this is what we'll be able to achieve today, and then we can have a bit of a discussion on the next step in our Q&A section. So what I'll do now is I will I'll stop sharing my screen, and then what we could do is people could, in the chat, potentially share of the 6 topics, if there was any of them that they would find particularly interesting. Actually, I'll send the list in the in the chat. And people could share 1 to 6 if that were whichever they would prefer. And what we would do with that is we can go through how to develop a search strategy for these specific research topics. They didn't actually copy with numbers, so you could just share the theme. So if it's breast cancer, just say breast cancer. If it's humanitarian settings, if it's AI, if it's IR, in the chat. Okay, nice. I see quite a lot of variety in terms of opinions. Okay, I'll just give people another 2 minutes if anyone has any more suggestions. For those who just joined, I'm going to resend a list of topics. So these are potential research topics, and feel free to share which of them would be interesting to you. I'll just resend them now in case people don't have access to the last part. Okay, so 2 more minutes and then we can do a bit of the searches. All right. We have 3 different topics, and I was hoping there would be a majority one. So if anybody has not kind of voted on any of them, feel free to do so. Temmie, sorry to put you on the spot. Do you want to choose one
Yeah.
of the 3?
Um. Okay. I think I was going to pick radiation safety and regulation. So
Okay, that's fine. So we'll go with that. So I'll just share back my screen. So the activity that we've got planned is for people to create search strategies and try and share them in the group. So I think we will get the chance to do all 3. It would be in different kind of ways. So so this is our main topic. The next step would be to try and transform that into a research question for a scoping review title or a paper title, something like Radiation Safety and Regulation in Clinical Radiology Practice in Africa would be maybe a in clinical radiology practice in Africa would be a paper title, but if you wanted to kind of have a specific research question, we would want to think about. Does anybody want to make any kind of suggestions of what a specific research question could be? We're trying to the reason and so basically the reason why you would want a very clear research question is a lot of other things would depend on it. So for example, what kind of studies would you want to include and exclude? So you want to think about inclusion and exclusion criteria at this level, and it could be something like this. Are there national, maybe we'll go in order, so regional, national, local, radiation safety and regulation guidelines for clinical radiology practice. And basically here you are specifying what is it that you want to look for. So we're looking at any document that includes something about radiation safety and regulation. We are talking about Africa in general, but you're looking for anything that looks at maybe regional, local, and this basically specifies the field. So this would exclude things like, we're not interested in things like clinical oncology. Nuclear medicine is will be a bit of an in-between, but in this situation we're excluding things like clinical oncology. We are also excluding any kind of technical work. So these are things that we are not interested in, and you could adjust them based on what you end up finding. So basically our key terms here, and these it's very important, again, to have a very clear research question, because the key terms would basically come from that. So here, the first one that we have is national, regional. So we would be interested in Africa. We would be interested in African countries. And in some systematic reviews, you could see that every single country would be named in the search strategy. The other thing is you would want to think about any potential way to denote radiation safety and regulation. And then the last thing you would want to consider is anything that could mean clinical radiology. So this is something like words like radiologists, clinical radiologists. And basically that would conclude our main key term searches. And the way to go about doing the search, we can use PubMed. So this is the way to actually do the searches in details. Again, this is something that Valerie goes into in quite a lot of details in his workshop. But for example, one of the things he mentioned was that you could start searching using main terms, so clinical radiology. So when you're searching in a data set or a database, we have what's called a mesh terms. And a mesh term is basically a very general, broad term for a word or a concept. And once you include a mesh term on your database, it would include a lot of other subsets. So for example, if we include radiology as a mesh term, it would include any mention of or any concept that's similar to it. So things like radiology, interventional radiology, radiology information system, any mention of these concepts. And it does have some its limitation, for example, because it would include a lot of things that are very irrelevant to your study, but you can also it gives you quite a lot of breadth. So basically, you would want to balance whether or not you want to include big concepts or you want to include something that's very specific. So we'll ignore that for now. What we'll do is we'll start building our terms. So things like clinical radiology. So we want a paper to have clinical radiology. We could do that in two ways. So the easy way is to do specific words, and then for each of the key terms, and then combine them together. Again, I'm not going into this in detail because it was included in the previous one, but I'll just go very quickly through what I mean by include all specific variations of what a key term would look like. So we have clinical radiology, we have radiology in general, we have radiologist. And what we're doing here is we're including every possible combination of these words, whether it's in maybe the title of the abstract of a paper. So here we're talking about if a paper has any of these terms in its title and its abstract, then it would be captured by our search strategy. There are other truncation terms. So basically, if you do radiology and include this, it would include any other word that ends with radiology, radiologist, but I'm not going to talk about these here. So for example, we're doing the search now. So this will give us any paper that has, sorry, I made a mistake. Let me just fix that. We're trying to get any of these ones, either of these ones. So radiology or rad. So here our search is for any paper that has any of these terms in the title or the abstract. So as you can see here, we have a very large number of papers. The next thing you would want to do is you would want to go back to your Q terms and include terms for the other ones. So we have radiation safety or radiation regulation guidelines, and then you can search. So we have a smaller number. We've not combined any of these search strategies yet. And then the other thing we would want to do is look at Africa, add with or, and then you can add other African countries. So I'm going to add Sudan because that's where I'm from. I'm going to add Nigeria because that's where Tammy's from. So I'm just using these as examples. You could include all African countries. So we'll just do a search. And the last step would be to combine all of your search terms together. So add and you want to now combine everything together. So this gave us about 17 studies to go through. And you want to go through all of these 17 studies that would include things about radiology, about radiation safety, about Africa in them. The main thing to know about these search strategies is you would have to reiterate them multiple times. So you can start by quickly going through the different studies and seeing what type of studies you're picking up, what other studies you're not picking up, and adjust your search strategy accordingly. I'm just going to go back. I'm just going to stop sharing and see if there are any other questions, because the other option that I'm going to show is how you could use things like ChatGPT or Google Gemini to maybe do some of these searches. Do people have any questions about this? Okay. So the next thing that I'll do is show an example of how. Can you guys see my screen? Okay. So the other thing that you could do is you can try and get a different, basically you could try and put in a prompt in a generative AI, whichever software. Maybe it would be better if you have a very well formulated research question, and then this could help you identify what key terms that you could use, and sometimes even what key, what research strategies, which search strategies or search terms that you could use. So you are a So I'm just writing a prompt. And the more details that you can put in the prompt, the better. So this is for a scoping review on are there, I think maybe what are, maybe a snapshot of regional, national, radiological safety and guidelines in Africa. So basically, sometimes it's helpful to tell in the prompt what is the expertise that would be needed to answer this specific question. And just a little bit about details. You could repurpose this if you want to, and I'll send it in the chat. Basically, a snapshot in Africa for scoping review. So please provide a list of possible key terms and a usable strategy. GPT tends to have very long answers, so please keep responses short. Okay, so basically this will be a very similar thing to what we've done. So the main key terms would be radiation safety, regulation, different words for clinical radiology, and then for the different areas. So here are different search terms that we have. Basically, one for each of the different key terms, and then these are combined together. So what we could do is we can go back to our search here. We can use some of the ChatGPT terms. So we'll copy this. Make sure to remove the areas. So we have a search here. We have about 12,000. We can go back to advanced. So we just need to correct where the mistakes are. So maybe this isn't a mesh term. So we'll remove this. All right, so we have, yep, so we just cleared the warning. The next step is for guidelines. We have a very large selection. We have some errors here, so we just need to clear those. Regulation, standard protocol. So we'll just copy that again. And just the reason why we need to double check is obviously a lot of ChatGPT answers are predicted. They're not necessarily reflective of what you would actually find. So they look true, but you need to double check to make sure that they're actually true. So we've done regulation, standard, and protocol. We have about the same. And then for the last one, okay, yeah, we've got a couple. Sorry, I know it's not the most exciting things. I'm just copying and pasting, but it's just another way that people could try and get a bit of a more exhaustive list. So we have about nearly 350,000. So we just have to do that process again. Again, sorry, it's not the fastest. And then the last one is for the different African countries. There's a bit of a mistake here. We'll just do this. What exactly is it? And here you could basically list every African country. You wouldn't really need to do that if you have Africa as a mesh term, but we will do that. And then the last thing you want to do is you want to add everything together. So with and, so we have protocol. And then search. So that gave us 15. But the difference would be these are a lot more closer to the research question compared to the previous searches that we've had. And then what you would want to do is kind of go through these and see which areas are a bit more restrictive, which areas are a bit more general than what you would want to do in practice. So I'll just share the prompt that I used here that you can change to any other research question. I'll share that in the messages and I'll stop sharing. What I would want us to do next is, if people are able to, is to try and apply these search terms and maybe share what you found in the chat. So hopefully you could pick one of these questions. I'll share them again. I don't know if new people can see the history of the messages, and that's why I'm sending them again. So these are the different topics that we have proposed. You can use these or any other topics. You can use the prompt. Try and do the exercise in PubMed. I will send the link for that as well. And just maybe take 10-15 minutes working on that. And when people are ready, maybe you can then share with us how many studies that you found, which research question do you have, and how many studies did you end up finding. I see that more people have joined. What I've done is I've invited other people to join the stage because we have a small group, so it might be easier if people want to, if they want to ask a question or anything, they could just turn on their mic. You don't have to turn on your camera, and then ask the question. So I'll just invite people to the stage. Feel free to accept it or not. And then that would be would allow people, if you're doing the exercise and you are struggling or you have any questions, you can ask. I'll also send the instructions in the chat. And the reason I'm not sharing my screen is I won't be able to see what people have sent. So I'll just keep monitoring the chat. I'm just going to set a timer for 10 minutes and people feel free to choose any of the topics suggested or anything that you would prefer, and try and do a search strategy and just share the findings that you have in the chat. Hello. Uh, what we've done just now was we tried to go through a list of potential research topics. So this is the list here. I feel like I'm bombarding the chat with this list, but I'll just send it again. So this is a list of potential research topics. We just gone through how to try and formulate one of these topics into a research question and to search in PubMed potential studies that could or papers that could answer that research question. So it's more of an exercise. So what I've asked people to do was to try and copy what I've done for a different research question or any research that would be of interest to them. If you've not seen the different exercise, it might not be very easy to do this exercise. What I would suggest is I have a 10-minute timer, so in about 6 more minutes, people would hopefully have tried to do the same thing, and then they can share what they've done in the chat. And at that point, I'll explain again the different steps. Okay, so it's been 10 minutes. Those who've tried to do the exercise, do you mind sharing your findings? So, for example, what kind of key terms did you find? If you've managed to get all the way through the end, how many studies were you able to identify?
So I tried to do it with the ultrasound. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I tried to do it with the ultrasound services in humanitarian settings, but I think my research question wasn't very good.
Okay.
So I there were two questions. So I did the first one was what ultrasound services are available during humanitarian crisis in African countries. And then the second question was how accessible are the available ultrasound services in African countries undergoing humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
And my key terms were humanitarian crisis, humanitarian situations, ultrasound services,
Yeah.
availability, accessibility, Africa, and then I just put like 3 or 4 African countries as well.
Yeah.
So searching, I split the searches based off of that as well. So I did ultrasound, just ultrasound alone first. Got a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
over 200,000, and then did humanitarian crisis and situation and got 739. Then availability, accessibility, available, accessible, like that was over 1 million. And then just African countries, about 113,000. But then when I then combined with the and feature, like the different queries, then it started to get funny. And my first search, I had no papers.
That's fine. So that does happen, and again, like I said, it's a quite an iterative process because
Mm-hmm.
the next step would be to go through each of the different terms and basically try and refine them as much as possible. So I'll share back my screen and see maybe. Before I do that, does anybody else want to share? Okay, I'm going to share my screen, but if anybody else wants to take us through what they've done, please feel free to do so. Okay, so for the last person that joined us, what we tried to do was we looked at this specific research question. So, of the 6 topics that we had, this is the one that we chose. So, radiation safety and regulation in clinical radiology practice in Africa. It was something along what are the regional, national, local radiation safety and regulation guidelines for clinical radiology practice in Africa. And the key terms we've come up with were Africa obviously being the main, the setting, the radiation safety and regulation, and then also clinical radiology practice. And the reason why we want to specify what are the key terms is the searches that we would do would depend on the key terms. We try to, so ideally, once you have key terms, you would want to find synonyms or any other common terms that you would use for clinical radiology. We go into extensive ways of how you can do that in a previous session on systematic reviews, but we try to come up with different variations for the same term. And we've also discussed how we can use things like ChatGPT to help us identify what are key concepts that people could use and to come up with a search strategy. And I've shared the prompt of what we used in the chat. So once we finally have a final term, what you can do is, so this one gave us 143 results. One thing you could do that could be very helpful is to remove all the mesh terms. We don't necessarily need to remove it for Africa because I think we would want anything that would mean Africa, and it would mostly be countries. So this was the first one. The second one is radiology. So maybe you want to remove any term that might not necessarily mean what you want. So diagnostic imaging is something that we would want. So I'm starting now by removing all the mesh terms and then going through the different terms. We have radiology, we have medical imaging, we have diagnostic imaging again. And because when you include a mesh term, you can repeat the words, so we'll just remove the repeats. So we have radiology, clinical radiology. Okay, radiology, medical imaging, clinical radiology. One thing to pay attention to is the number of brackets, because that could cause issues. Yeah. Guidance, we have to remove that. Regulation, standards, legislation, compliance, policy, protocol. So we're removing all the mesh terms. And then the idea is once you do that, it gives you a bit more room. And that would allow you, that would improve the number of results that we've got. So we have radiation safety, exposure, dose management. So I don't think dose management is something that we'd be interested in. Okay, we actually got a bit less with this one. There are a few errors which we would need to improve. Basically, I'm trying to go through them to see if there's any term that would be unnecessarily limiting. Also including other terms, so maybe clinical imaging. Another thing that you could do is you could start including what imagings would be, or maybe things like CT. And the idea behind this is you want to capture as much of the variety, because when you're writing a paper, you could use, ideally you would use common terms, but sometimes you could use very specific terms. And again, it's iterative, so okay, I seem to be reducing the number as I'm going on, but that's expected. It's not a very straightforward process. Okay, I have a mistake here, so I have an extra bracket. And again, the idea is you would try and include as much as you can. The other thing that you could do is once you get to this step, you can ask ChatGPT to provide a bit more support. And the reason I'm relying a bit more on this, which I wouldn't necessarily do it generally. You ideally would want to do this yourself, but I think this might be one way that can help us maybe start doing the searches, experimenting a bit more with the searches. And I'm suggesting it not for us to rely on this as the way to do the search, but more as an additional support in how you are when you're trying to do the search. So what I would want to do with this is look at this strategy and then see if I get any improvement and see why I have that improvement. And based on that information, I'll adjust the searches again. So mesh terms, which we've removed, which could explain that. The other thing is trying to broaden the concepts, which is fine. And then instead of doing it the same way I've done before, what we could do is to just combine them straight away. So earlier, what I tried to do was to go through them one by one, but you could just do that right away. Which expanded the number a little bit. So our initial one was 146, and with including the mesh terms, the additional terms for radiology, that there was a bit of improvement. And again, we have to go through them. The main issue is you can get studies, but do they actually answer your question is a different thing. And based on what you find, you have to adjust again. One thing that I've not mentioned here is for a research question like this, when we want to find country level, so whether it's regional or national guidelines, PubMed is a start, but what would be the most important search to do is to do grey literature search. So looking at PubMed, this is mostly for published studies, and this would be considered white literature search, so search that are accessible on databases. But for this one, you would want to do things like Google searches, going onto ministries' websites and or country level kind of government websites to look at if they have specific radiation safety. So if you want to do some research, if you want to look at these guidance, for example, and let's say you want to look at the RCR website, I'm just using the RCR because it's it's just a bit easier. So what you want to do is look at their publications. So I'm just going to look at any guideline. Is anybody more familiar with their website? Where would they have their publications? So for example, this is a new standard that the RCR has published on, say, standards of education and training. One thing you could do is just kind of to differentiate the difference between grey literature searches is it would be very difficult for us to find this paper if we search on Google, for example, or if we use Google search, because this is considered a grey literature. So for this specific research question, you would want to have done this search because that's the minimum everybody would have to do for a scoping review. But you would also need to do a next step of looking at different radiology associations to see if they have publications on the matter. And that is actually where you would get the majority of information for this specific type of question. It would be a little bit different for other questions on availability of services and things like that. But one other reason why we're not necessarily finding a lot of studies or a lot of relevant studies is this information is not necessarily suitable for, or this is not the most suitable venue or database to search for it. What I want to do for the last 10 minutes is just talk about next steps and open up the floor for more questions. But before I do so, does anybody have any questions or want to share any of their experience with the search? Okay, so what we'll do next is I'll just go through what we potentially think the next steps could be if you'd be interested on starting a scoping review. So ideally this would be done in groups, so people who are interested in picking up a research project or taking the lead on a research project could nominate themselves either here or in the research group, the research WhatsApp group. If you're not part of that WhatsApp group, please let someone know in the chat now so that you can be added to that, or in the WhatsApp group, the general WhatsApp group. And the reason why it would be helpful for people to be able to do this in groups is there's quite a bit to go through, and it's always helpful to kind of share the load. And the other thing is that people have different strengths. So if you're starting this for the first time, or if you don't necessarily have a background in research, it's better to start with a group. I'm saying a group, and I mean potentially some of the attendees here, but we would also provide support from the RIGAF team. And the way we would want to do that is through doing follow-up sessions. So this would be the initial workshop, and we would want to do another workshop in about a week's time. And the idea is once people have agreed on or express interest in any of the research topics that we've proposed or have their own, then the next week or so I think we have a time set, but maybe Tammy can share that in a bit, is we would want people to have finalized a research question for that topic and have attempted to do the searches. So I say complete searches, but what I really mean here is to identify basically how many studies people would need to get through. And also think just a little bit about a timeline. So it might take between 4 to 6 months for people to complete the different steps. So to go through the studies, to extract data, to try and interpret the data, and to try and work on the paper. And again, like I said, the RIGAF team, we will plan different workshops to tackle the different steps that people need to do. In my experience, I've worked with a number of writing clubs where people would have regular check-ins so that people could discuss issues early on and get support, but also have some sort of structures in writing papers, because this is an individual effort. There isn't really a built-in structure, and people would have to do that on their own, and it might be difficult initially. So that kind of helps with that aspect. And hopefully the next session would be to kind of go through what are the different studies that people have identified, and also what kind of timeline they're thinking of. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but we've got a few minutes left, and I wondered if we could use this time for questions and if people have anything that they want to ask the RIGAF team. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat as well if people have any questions. I also think the next session that we have will be next week on the...
It's potentially on the 23rd of August.
Okay. I was logging into my WhatsApp. Yeah, so the 23rd of August, so which gives people just over a week to try and complete the different steps. Is anyone here would be interested in any of these topics? Not necessarily lead if that's not something that you feel comfortable with, if you don't have a lot of experience, but it would be helpful to know if people would be interested in taking any of these research topics. Another way you could communicate that to the team is if you message in the WhatsApp group as well. I'll stay on.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Thank you so much for the lecture. But can I just ask you, how can I join the WhatsApp group?
Are you part of the...
Actually, this is my...
Go ahead.
Yes. This is my first time watching your lectures. So...
Oh, yeah, that's fine. So are you part of the RIGAF WhatsApp group? Any of the RIGAF groups?
No.
Okay. I'm just trying to see if someone...
Ladies and gentlemen, allow...
Sorry, I'm in my public library, so it's a bit... So how about I'll share my email in the chat. If you message me, actually I'll share my... Are you on WhatsApp?
Yes, I have WhatsApp.
So if you message me on WhatsApp, I'll try and get you in touch with the admin to include you in the WhatsApp group.
Thank you so much.
I'm not sure if you've got the message. Did you see that?
There's also a link to the WhatsApp research group in the chat as well.
Oh, is there? Okay, I'll share that in the chat if that's all right with everyone. Which of the groups, Tammy?
Oh no, it's on the chat right here.
Oh, okay.
On here.
I see.
So it's just the main one. I don't know how to. Let me see. Kenny already put the one for the research group on there. Um,
Okay, I found the link.
okay.
So
Okay.
me. Okay, I think I've just sent it on the chat. I can't see my messages on the chat, so I'm hoping other people can. Can people see the messages?
Yes, it's on there now.
All right, fine. So I guess you could just use that to join. I guess maybe people could think about it a bit more and then just let us know in the group about which topics they'd be interested in. And hopefully we'll see you guys on the 23rd. That's all from me. Tammy, do you have anything more to add?
No, it's pretty much it. And I think the only thing I would add is the meeting on the 23rd is likely to be dependent on people like responding and saying, these are the topics we are interested in, and then because then it would help to better plan the next meeting essentially.
That's yeah, I agree with you. I think it would be helpful to know what we're working on, because it would be more focused on looking at the different research questions, the search strategies, try and refine that, and it might be the best use of the workshop to get these sorted. Well, all right. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll send you a feedback form. Please feel free to kind of fill that in for us. And we look forward to hearing from you guys on the WhatsApp group. Thank you. Enjoy your evening and weekend. Bye.
Bye everyone.